I'm Sarah with the Bay County Public Library. Thank you guys so much for joining our first Tuesday at 2 program. The rest of the programs are going to be held at the library itself in the meeting room, and we have a variety of topics and subjects. All of that can be found on our Facebook events page or our website, which is nwrls.com. And I'm thrilled to have Robert Lamphear here. He has been teaching Tuesday at 2 programs with the library since, was it 2016, probably 2016. So it's been quite a few years, and I've really enjoyed learning so much more about Shakespeare than I've known in the past. And this year is Shakespeare's Women. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass it over to our expert, and anyone who does have their video on, we can go ahead and mute and let Robert take over. Thank you guys for joining us.
Well, hello, I'm Robert Lamphear, and I've been teaching collegiately for over 25 years. And when I retired from that, I started teaching at lifelong learning courses, thankfully through Gulf Coast State College and their Encore program. Since then, I've continued, and I also teach lifelong learning courses at the University of South Florida and at the University of Michigan. I am a snowbird. I come from Michigan, and so that's kind of why I tend to be here only during the winter months. Today's talk is Shakespeare's Women, and I'd like to start out with the beginning of mankind. Look, I just did it right there. Since the beginning of humankind, men have felt the right to dominate women. And regardless of how you think things began until recently, women have never had a chance at a fair chance. Within the first 2,000 words of the 32,000 words in Genesis, of the over 780,000 words in the King James Version of the Bible, Adam blames the woman and God for making her, and this is accepted by all three major world religions. And the man said, the woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. Women have been underrated for most of humanity's existence. Someone just sent me a chat message. I thought you said this was about Shakespeare. Here he comes, honest. I have been fascinated with William Shakespeare most of my life. One aspect that has astonished me was how this man could create such wonderful female characters. I want to understand how he did it. What I plan to do today is to review the women in William Shakespeare's life and examine correlations between the real women in his life and the exceptional females in some of his plays. One of Shakespeare's predecessors, John Lyly, was the first playwright to use love as a central theme for comedies. Lyly, however, used stereotypical women, characters based upon prevailing patriarchal tradition. Shakespeare is the first playwright to create a female character with depth, Julia in The Two Gentlemen of Verona. Sir Stanley Wells attests William Shakespeare wrote this play first with the heroine Julia. He claims Shakespeare did not invent the bright, daring girl who cast off the outward signs of her sex and personal identity and goes masquerading in the world as a man. She already existed in previous romances. Shakespeare's creation in Julia was of a flesh and blood heroine. She is followed in his later plays by Viola and As You Like It, Viola in Twelfth Night, Rosalind As You Like It, and Portia in The Merchant of Venice. Now the world of romantic comedy is a woman's world, and it is dominated by the current figure who masquerades as a man, while all of her womanliness is apparent to the audience. Each of Shakespeare's female characters I mentioned represents as much of an improvement on Julia as Shakespeare with Julia improves upon the nebulous females of the previous prose romances and the female characters of all the comedies dominating the stage at the time modeled on John Lyly's plays. Yet how did Shakespeare gain such understanding of women? He used his keen observation skills, which provide so many of his insights into humanity, and observed the women in his life, beginning with his mother. Mary Arden may have been born as early as 1535, though her birth date is usually placed around 1536 and 1538. She was the youngest of 8 daughters born to the unidentified first wife of Robert Arden. That means we do not even know the name of Shakespeare's maternal grandmother. This example showing the lack of information we have about Shakespeare is why there is so much speculation about him. Among Robert Arden's holdings had been 80 acres in Snitterfield. Here, Richard Shakespeare leased lands from Robert. It is worth emphasizing that the very similar social backgrounds existed for these two families. Richard was also a husband, a farmer, like Robert. So these were well-off peasant families, very similar prospects, old-fashioned, loyal to the places of local piety, the guilds and shrines. Mary then grew up in a rural environment with a wide range of practical skills and deep knowledge of how a home and farm should be run. Much of this she would have passed on to her children. For example, to cite a very simple instance, most of the words for farm implements, tools, utensils, linens, and cloths in her father's inventory of his will, which Mary was the executor, are part of her eldest son's, William's, vocabulary in the plays. I know the proper way to show a woman's maiden name is with the nay. But by the time this presentation's done, I will have used enough nays that you'll think I'm becoming a horse. So I'd rather just say Mary Arden Shakespeare. Mary's husband was a man of similar background to her father, a small cultivator who apprenticed as a glover and rose in the world to become mayor in Stratford, eventually buying the title of gentleman. Shakespeare's mother's strength may have contributed to the strength of his female characters, especially some of the mothers in his plays. For example, in the play Coriolanus, Volumnia encourages her son Coriolanus in his military superiority. After his success, she urges him to seek political office. When he is consequently exiled, generals tend rarely to debate as well as senators do. His mother, Volumnia, convinces Coriolanus not to attack Rome, becoming the city's heroine. Many critics believe she fosters his Oedipus complex, even choosing for him a mousy-mannered wife. If my son were my husband, I should freely rejoice in that absent wherein he won honor than in the embracements of his bed, where he should show most love. When yet he was but tender-bodied, and the only son of my womb, when youth with comeliness plucked all gaze his way, when for a day of kings' entreaties a mother should not sell an hour from her beholding, I, considering how honor would become such a person, that is, was no better than picture-like to hang by the wall, if renown bade it not stir, was pleased to let him seek danger where he was like to find fame. To a cruel war I sent him, from whence he returned, his brows bound with oak. I sprang not more in joy at first hearing he was a man-child, than now in first seeing he had proved himself a man. She prides herself on his achievement. Another example of a mother occurs in Titus Andronicus. Defeated and captured by Titus Andronicus, Tamora, the queen of the Goths, witnesses the execution of her eldest son as retribution for the 20 sons Titus lost. From the beginning of the play, Tamora feels the excruciating pain of the loss of a child. Her pleas show the depth of her love for her son prior to his demise. Stay, Roman brethren, gracious conqueror, victorious Titus, rue the tears I shed, a mother's tears and passion for her son. And if thy sons were ever dear to thee, oh, think my son to be as dear to me. Suffice not that we are brought to Rome to beautify thy triumphs and return captive to thee and to thy Roman yoke. But must my sons be slaughtered in the streets for valiant doing in their country's cause? Oh, if the fight for king and commonwealth were piety in thine, it is in these. Andronicus, stain not thy tomb with blood. Wilt thou draw near the nature of the gods? Draw near them then in being merciful. Sweet mercy is nobility's true badge. Twice, thrice noble Talus, Titus, spare my firstborn son. And some plays have no mothers at all. I got to go back. I'm sorry. I jumped ahead of myself. We call someone who loses a spouse a widow or a widower. We call someone who loses their parents an orphan. There's no word for someone who loses a child because it's not supposed to happen. The rest of the play shows a mother's relentlessness in the battle of revenge that decimates both Titus and Tamora's families. There are many mothers in Shakespeare's plays of varying contribution to their children's lives, and there are some plays without mothers, like The Tempest. The island exiled Prospero's daughter Miranda, her naivete shows her lack of a motherly guidance. Mary Arden Shakespeare had 8 children. Joan, the firstborn, died in her first weeks. Margaret died at age 1 and Anne at age 7. All bore the name of Mary's sisters. The second Joan survived with the 4 boys. Joan Shakespeare, his only surviving sister, was 5 years younger than William Shakespeare when she was born in April 1569 and baptized on the 15th of that month. She married William Hart in 1599, with whom she had 4 children: William, Mary, Thomas, and Michael. The Henley Street house, where Joan lived most of her life, if not all, in its entirety is a 3-bay timbered framed house, now known as Shakespeare's birthplace. All the property that stands there now is really the result of a 19th century restoration. When John Shakespeare died and his eldest son William took possession of the Henley Street house, he charged his sister Joan and her struggling family only 12 pence a year rent. This demonstrates a brotherly care and a concern augmented by the close proximity of the siblings' houses. Joan is his only sister. She could have influenced him in his career and retirement, even to the end of his life, since she outlived him. One example of this sibling relationship occurs in Twelfth Night, where twins are separated by a shipwreck and mistaken for one another, especially when Viola disguises herself as a boy for protection. At the end of the play, they meet, as in this picture, face to face. Do I stand there? I never had a brother, nor can there be that deity in my nature of here and everywhere. I had a sister whom the blind waves and surges have devoured. Of charity, what kin are you to me? What countryman? What name? What parentage?
Of Massaline, Sebastian was my father, such as Sebastian was my brother too. So went he suited to his watery tomb. If spirits can assume both form and suit, you come to fright us.
A spirit I am indeed, but am in that dimension grossly clad, which from the womb I did participate. Were you a woman as the rest goes even? I should my tears let fall upon your cheek and say, thrice welcome, drowned Viola.
My father had a mole upon his brow,
And so had mine.
and died that day when Viola from her birth had numbered 13 years.
Oh, that record is lively in my soul. He finished indeed his mortal act that day that made my sister 13 years.
If nothing lets to make us happy both, but this my masculine usurped attire, do not embrace me till each circumstance of place, time, fortune do conhere and jump. that I am Viola, which to confirm, I'll bring you to a captain in this town, where lie my maiden weeds, by whose gentle help I was preserved to serve this noble count. All the occurrence of my fortune since hath been between this lady and this lord.
And thank you, Sarah, for helping me out. The love between siblings really is like no other relationship that exists. Mary Arden Shakespeare, remember her? She was Joan and William's mother. Mary Arden Shakespeare was probably educated enough to read and cipher, so she may have supported her eldest son William's literary interests, even after his hasty marriage to an older woman, or perhaps because of it. In 1582, when he was 18, William Shakespeare quickly married Anne Hathaway of Shottery, who was 26 at the time. 6 months later, they gave birth to their first child, Susanna. According to the inscription on her grave, Anne was born in 1555 or 6 and was the eldest daughter of 7 children, 3 of whom died in infancy. There is some speculation that Anne's father, Richard Hathaway, may have been married twice, though if so, the name of his first wife does not survive. Another unknown relative may, I prefer to stick with the facts, okay? We know only of Joan Kittle, who could potentially be Anne's mother based on timing and perhaps gave birth to her older brother Bartholomew in 1549. Richard thought enough of Bartholomew, even if born out of wedlock, to leave him everything and for him to take care of Joan. Richard's wife of 1555, Joan, named in his will, outlived him by 15 years, dying in 1599. No details remain about Joan's relationship with Anne, although it is likely that Anne lived with her at Hewlands, the family home, until her marriage in 1582. A couple of side notes. Richard's surname may have also appeared as Gardner, synonymous with his role as farmer, just like Kittle, like Joan Kittle with Anne's father, married a younger man. They presumably lived at the Henley House until William Shakespeare's success allowed him to buy a new place, which had 20 to 30 rooms, suggesting a very large household. John Shakespeare, William Shakespeare's father, could have lived there in New Place from 1597 until his death in 1601. Mary Arden Shakespeare, William's mother, until her death in 1608. And Shakespeare's brother, Gilbert and Richard, until their deaths in 1622 and 1623. So you've got all these families. Hall's Croft was not built until 1613. So it's likely that Susanna and John Hall lived in New Place from their marriage in 1607, during which their daughter Elizabeth was given birth in 1608. So you've got all these people living in this new place. Judith Shakespeare may have even lived there with her husband until she got married in 1616 to Thomas Quinney. There's no evidence that there was any members of the Hathaway family living in New Place. Anne would have then had, because of all these people in one environment, influence of both Joan Kittle Hathaway from her youth and Mary Arden Shakespeare from her cohabitation on how to be a wife. And Shakespeare provides a variety of examples of wives, but the best marriages, and I should probably qualify things here. I mentioned speculation, so I throw some perhaps in here, perhaps the best marriages, because this is my speculation now. I think one of the best plays that demonstrates one of the best wives is The Taming of the Shrew. Some may think this an odd choice, but in this play, Kate and Petruchio think they seek one thing, which is something totally different from what they find: true love and respect for one another. As Kate says at the conclusion of the play, "Thy husband is thy Lord, thy life, thy keeper, thy head, thy sovereign. one that cares for thee, and for thy maintenance commits his body to painful labor, both by sea and land, to watch the night in storms, the day in cold, while thou liest warm at home, secure and safe, and craves no other tribute at thy hands, but love, fair looks, and true obedience. Too little payment for so great a debt. Such duty as the subject owes the prince, even such a woman oweth to her husband. Why are our bodies soft and weak and smooth, unapt to toil and trouble in the world, but that our soft conditions and our hearts should well agree with our external parts? Our strength as weak, our weakness past compare, that seeming to be most which we indeed least are. Then veil your stomachs, for it is no boot, and place your hands below your husband's foot, in token of which duty, if he please, my hand is ready, may do it him ease. Why, there's a wench, come on and kiss me, Kate. With a physical demonstration of her trust in him, she places her hand under his foot, knowing he would never harm her. Trust is the foundation of their partnership, the essence of a marriage of true minds, which they seal with a kiss. Yet another demonstration, this time of love. Macbeth exhibits another such partnership, then again, an odd choice for an example of Shakespeare's best wives. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth do have an extremely close relationship and trust in one another as the extent of their partnership manifests throughout the play. As for love, his is as we would expect from the romantic hero, while hers feeds off his power as it increases. She's reading the letter he sent her. This have I thought good to deliver thee, my dearest partner of greatness, that thou mightst not lose the dues of rejoicing by being ignorant of what greatness is promised thee. Lay it to thy heart, and farewell. Glamis thou art, and Cawdor, and shall be what thou art promised. Yet do I fear thy nature, it is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. So again, the patriarchal time of the 12th century when the play is set was much more misogynistic than even the Elizabethan era. This idea of the dearest partner of greatness is not even a concept that would have been around in people's minds. When he finally arrives, she claims, great Glamis, worthy Cawdor, greater than both by the all hail hereafter. Thy letters have transported me beyond this ignorant present, and I feel now the future in the ensuing. My dearest love, Duncan comes here tonight, and when goes hence? Tomorrow, as he proposes. Oh, never. She will do anything for her husband, anything to help him achieve the greatness. And even if it's to become king through murder, and it's not just murder, it's regicide, killing of a king. It will also make her queen, yet she dismisses that. She doesn't do it for herself. She does it all for him. When Macbeth learns later of his wife's death near the end of the play, he comments that things are a bit hectic. He has no time to mourn. Lady Macbeth's death also allows Macbeth, or Shakespeare, to reflect on life with one of the finest passages ever written, showing his mastery of language. She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. Is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. I have been reading Judi Dench's Shakespeare, the Man Who Pays the Rent, and she makes a good case for Queen Isabella in Richard II as another example of a superior wife. So both Joan Kittle Hathaway and Mary Arden Shakespeare would guide Anne on how to be a wife and a mother and how to run a household, while Anne's daughters most likely learned from her. So, as best evidenced, I think, by the epitaph on her gravestone in Trinity Church at Stratford upon Avon. She is buried in Holy Trinity Church, just to the left of her husband, behind his grave and monument. Anne's grave is marked with a beautiful epitaph in Latin, dating from at least 1634 and probably written by her daughter, Susanna. Anne is described as a pious woman and a good mother, eulogized as so great a gift. The fact that this epitaph was preserved on a brass plaque testifies to Anne's important role in her family. Anne's Latin epitaph can be translated as, "Mother, you gave me the breast, you gave me milk and life. Woe is me, that for so great a gift my return will be but a tomb. Would that the good angel roll away the stone from its mouth, and that your form, like the body of Christ, could come forth. Yet my prayers are of no avail. Come quickly, Christ, that my mother, though shut in the tomb, may rise again and seek the stars." Mothers are essential throughout our lives, as was Anne to her daughters. Susanna had already, was always seemed to be considered the duller of Shakespeare's daughters. The virtuous older sister who married well, inherited the bulk of her father's estate, and was principally responsible for her mother's care in her old age. While she may have been viewed as such for centuries, evidence shows other aspects of Susanna. She was baptized on the 26th of May in 1583, 6 months after her parents' marriage. Her name, meaning purity, may constitute a promise to do better. She was also certainly educated, demonstrating a knowledge of Latin and an understanding of poetry. Dr. John Hall and Susanna were married at Holy Trinity on June 5th, 1607. Their only child, Elizabeth, was born on the 21st of February in 1608, 2.5 weeks short of 9 months and after their wedding. So this suggests that they may have, like her parents, anticipated the wedding. Paul was a Puritan. Susanna had Roman Catholic sympathies. She had some troubles with the church and perhaps her husband. They never had more children. Furthermore, Susanna was accused of adultery with Ralph Smith by John Lane, causing the Halls to sue for slander in 1613. Lane belonged to a group opposing the current vicar, Thomas Wilson. John Hall was one of Wilson's supporters, so he may have been the real target for the defamation. John Hall died on the 25th of November in 1635. His epitaph on his Holy Trinity Church altar stone reads, "Here is buried Hall, most celebrated in medical arts, in the hope of joyous happiness in the Lord God. He is worthy in honor, who might have vanquished Nestor in years, but the unyielding day takes all men." So John Hall's medical prowess is acknowledged, as is his faith. With a comparison with more time, he betters Nestor, who was the wisest of the Greeks in the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Nestor comparison also occurs on Shakespeare's monument at Trinity Church. So it's another character in Shakespeare's play Troilus and Cressida. That seems like a sufficient epitaph in itself, yet 2 lines were added. "Lest in the tomb he might want, his most faithful wife is now here, and he now has in death the companion of his life." So that little adultery thing kind of gets blown away by these last 2 lines, and the attesting of her virtue, further rebuking that aforementioned slander of adultery, was probably added by Susanna after her death. She had it pre-written, ready to go once she was laid down. And again, she's also credited with her mother's epitaph. Hers is somewhat interesting. It says, witty above her sex, but that's not all. Wise to salvation was good Mistress Hall. Something of Shakespeare was in that, but this, wholly of him with whom she's now in bliss. Then passenger has ne'er a tear to weep with her that wept with all that wept, yet she yet set herself to cheer them up with comforts cordial. Her love shall live, her mercy spread, when thou hast ne'er a tear to shed. So covertly, the epitaph suggests that Susanna's death brings reunion with her father ahead of the other kin who must lie waiting. Susanna Shakespeare seems to have been every inch the poet's daughter. She was 13 years old when Shakespeare was writing Romeo and Juliet, and it is notable that he changed the age of the heroine from the source story to make her the same age as his Susanna. Juliet is the only character in the play that develops throughout the entire play. She has the strength to make her own choices and follow through with her decisions. Juliet, as Desdemona and Othello, defy their fathers. Also, for both, the end is tragic death. Perhaps Shakespeare warns with his characters the spirited Susanna about obedience to her father. Shakespeare again demonstrates his mastery of language, capturing Susanna's wit and wisdom in the character he most likely based on her, Beatrice from Much Ado About Nothing, as shown in their initial encounter in the play.
I wonder that you will still be talking, Signor Benedict. Nobody marks you.
What, my dear Lady Disdain, are you yet living?
Is it possible Disdain should die while she hath such meat food to feed it as Signor Benedict? Courtesy itself must convert to disdain if you come in her presence.
Then courtesy a turncoat, but it is certain I am loved of all ladies, only you excepted. And I would I could find in my heart that I had not a hard heart, but truly I love none.
A dear happiness to women, they would else have been troubled with the pernicious suitor. I thank God and my cold blood I am of your humor for that. I had rather hear my dog bark at a crow than a man swear he loved me.
God keep your ladyship still in that mind, so some gentleman or other shall escape a predestined scratched face.
Scratching could not make it worse, as 'twere such a face as yours were.
Well, you are a rare parrot teacher.
A bird of my tongue is better than a beast of yours.
I would my horse had the speed of your tongue, and so good a continuer. But keep your way, in God's name, I'll have none.
You always end with a jade's trick. I know you of old.
Shakespeare again certainly depicted a great wit with his character Beatrice, who is definitely more like Susanna than her younger sister Judith. Judith Shakespeare, the twin sister of Hamlet, who died at age 11, was born in 1585 and outlived every member of the Shakespeare family except for her niece Susanna and John's daughter Elizabeth. Judith's behavior was beyond reproach. She had never cited in the vicar's court. She never was accused of immorality or failing to attend church as her sister was. When Judith was 26, she signed her mark as a witness to the sale of property in Stratford by Elizabeth Quinney and her son Adrian. Judith may have been in service to the Quinney family at the time. 5 years later, she married Thomas Quinney. There's much speculation about the circumstances of this marriage. It took place during Lent, and they failed to get the required bishop license, for which Thomas and probably Judith were both excommunicated from the Anglican Church. Thomas Quinney brought further scandal to Shakespeare's youngest daughter through his dalliance with Margaret Wheeler, who died in childbirth. Thomas's mother, Bess Quinney, may simply have asked Judith to put Thomas out of Wheeler's reach by marrying him. On the 12th of February in 1616, Judith Shakespeare and Thomas Quinney were married at Holy Trinity Church. This circumstance of a forced marriage may have been the catalyst for Shakespeare to create the role of Isabella, the novice nun in Measure for Measure, who must bed the acting head of state Angelo to save her brother's life. Around the same time, Shakespeare changed his will, giving part of Judith's marriage portion to trustees for 3 years in order to ensure that Quinney provided her with 150 pounds worth of land. Judith and Thomas had 3 sons together, Shakespeare, Richard, and Thomas. Though he only lived for 6 months, it is likely that Shakespeare Quinney was conceived while his grandfather was still alive. Judith lived another 20 years after the death of all 3 sons, but for some reason is not buried in Holy Trinity Church with the rest of the Shakespeare family. Her unmarked grave, with that of her twin brother Hamnet, exists somewhere in the churchyard of Holy Trinity. Shakespeare's daughters may have contributed to the focus in many of his plays on chastity and cuckoldry. Perhaps there is something of both Susanna and Judith in the magician's daughter Miranda. In The Tempest, who is famously discovered who plays chess with the next king of Naples, soon to be her husband, and to play chess well is usually a good sign of intelligence. How often do Susanna and Judith manage to get their mother or father into checkmate? Miranda's innocence may also reflect that last living relative of William Shakespeare, female, of course, Lady Elizabeth Hall Nash Bernard, Shakespeare's granddaughter, the only child of John and Susanna Hall, who was baptized on February 21st in 1608. Little Elizabeth was very much in her grandfather's mind when he made his will, in spite of the fact that as Hall's only daughter, she was as rich as an heiress. She married Thomas Nash in 1626. When her father died in 1635, they moved into New Place. Her husband died in 1647, and he left New Place and other property to his cousin, Edward Hall, but Elizabeth and her tenacious mother, Susanna, contested the will and retained the property. She married John, later Sir John Bernard, on June 5th, 1649, the year her mother died. Elizabeth may have written her mother Susanna's epitaph. Sometime afterwards, Bernard moved to his estate in Abington, Northamptonshire, where she died in 1670. Elizabeth had no children. With her death, Shakespeare's direct family came to an end. Shakespeare's daughter would be older, so not the best role models for characters of the time that he wrote his romances in the later years, containing heroines like Elizabeth's childhood innocence would reflect, who she was 8 years when he died. So characters that would have been like Mariana and Pericles, Perdita in The Winter's Tale, and Imogen and Cymbeline. Shakespeare's granddaughter Elizabeth, with whom he only shared a few years, may have really been the source of the pure virtue that these characters ended up displaying. Sorry, I moved on a little bit. In addition to the family members, other women had an effect on Shakespeare's female depictions in the plays. Most notably was his queen, Elizabeth I. Her love of theater allowed Shakespeare to perform at court as well as the public stages. From the sonnets, the dark lady and rival poet emerge, who may have both been Amelia Bassano Lanier. She also was a contender. There was a recent Atlantic article about her for the authorship as the person who wrote the plays. While she may have just been a close friend, she may have helped collaborate a bit and provided some of those insights into women that he had. There's also many characters like Doll Tearsheet and Mistress Quickly, who may have been a patron. They may have been a host in an establishment that Shakespeare frequented with the other members of the company. he may have just noticed them in the audience. So all this female history or family history, it's not what I came to talk about. I want to examine all of Shakespeare's amazing female characters, some of whom I have mentioned. And that's exactly what I'm going to do, not today, but in a course for this semester's Gulf Coast State College Encore. It's a lifelong learning program in Panama City that I'll be teaching a Shakespeare's female characters in January and February. Are we running out of time, Sarah? It's like 3:45.
You're doing good. And a note, I did put the Encore programs in the chat box if you want a link to the catalog.
Well, maybe let's just look at one character, okay, in a little bit more detail. Portia from The Merchant of Venice. For those of you who may not be familiar with the play, let me provide a brief overview of the main conflict. The title character, the Merchant of Venice, is Antonio, who funds with borrowed money his friend Bassanio's quest for the beauty of Belmont, Portia, and her wealth. Antonio borrows from the Jew Shylock, who made the condition that if the debt is not paid on time, Shylock required as interest a pound of the merchant's flesh. You may have guessed that these two hate each other. And that's what happens. Antonio's ship don't come in, literally, and he must pay Shylock with a pound of his flesh. When Portia enters the play in Act 1, Scene 2, she and her confidant Nerissa are discussing Portia's father's odd test for her suitors of 3 caskets, 1 gold, 1 silver, 1 lead. Although preferring her choice to make her own choice for a mate, Portia trusts her father's wisdom and abides by his wish. Unlike Juliet and Desdemona, by the way, Portia doesn't die. After Bassanio selects the correct casket as Portia had hoped, he learns of the distress his friend Antonio is in. Bassanio returns to Venice to help his friend. Portia and her maid Nerissa disguise themselves as a lawyer and his clerk. Women characters disguising themselves as men is not uncommon and most likely gave the all-male cast a break from portraying females. Furthermore, Julia and the 2 Gentlemen of Verona, Rosalind and As You Like It, Viola in Twelfth Night, and Imogen and Cymbeline all dress as a man to protect themselves. Portia dresses as a man to save Antonio in court with her wit and wisdom. Sound like anybody Shakespeare knew? Susanna. Again, Shakespeare's beautiful use of language appears when Portia, as Balthazar, explains to Shylock. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesses him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein does sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptered way. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings, is an attribute to God himself. And earthly power does then show likest God's when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy, and that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. I have spoke thus much to mitigate the justice of thy plea, which if thou follow, this strict court of Venice must needs give sentence against the merchant here. My deeds upon my head, I crave the law, the penalty and forfeit of my bond. Spoiler alert, this is how she mitigates the situation. Tarry a little, there is something else. This bond doth give thee here no jot of blood. The words expressly are a pound of flesh. Take then thy bond, take thou thy pound of flesh, but in the cutting it, if thou dost shed one drop of Christian bloods, thy lands and goods are by the laws of Venice confiscate unto the state of Venice. Portia triumphs in court, in love, and in life. She is the greatest of all Shakespeare's female characters. I want to thank everybody. Feel free to email me, rllwsgcsc@gmail.com. Are there any questions?
I had a comment.
Uh-oh.
No, it's just, you said that Shakespeare was the first person to put fully developed female characters in his plays. The ancient Greeks had done it. They recognized that sometimes the female character is more interesting than the male. There's Clytemnestra and Cassandra and can't think of all their names. Darn my memory. I tell you, when you're 80, when you're going to be 85, your memory goes. But there's a whole lot of female characters fully developed in the ancient Greeks, which Shakespeare could not read.
And again, who Shakespeare drew from as well. Lysistrata comes to mind. So strong.
He could not read Greek. And a little early for them to be translated yet.
He had a little Greek, not much. Anything else?
I was just fascinated by the fact that we have all of those portraits. Was it common for every family that had the money to have portraits done like that? I've never seen those before.
I think that some of those portraits are because they had a bit more money than others. But again, some of them could also be after the fact kind of portraits as well. So
Okay.
maybe not that they actually did a sitting. And you notice that at least Joan Kittle did not have, so Anne Hathaway's motherish or stepmother or whatever did not have any kind of a picture of her. Actually, the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust is doing a whole series and has been since 23, which was 400 years since Anne Hathaway's death. For the last 2 years, they've been focusing on Shakespeare's women and women of the time. And one of the things that keeps coming up is how little we know about those women during that period. Because again, it's a patriarchal society. You're lucky to find things about Shakespeare, and certainly women of that era would have also been a problem. Go ahead, Alice.
Sometimes those portraits, which you see are not really very good, are done by family members. The one portrait we have of Jane Austen was done by her sister.
And I know Ben Jonson did a portrait that Chantos Shakespeare is often thought to be done by Ben Jonson. Richard Burbage, I'm sorry. And he also did one of Ben Jonson and several others as well as himself. So
It wouldn't have cost much to get it.
at the time.
It wouldn't have cost much, you know.
Yeah, it wouldn't have cost much. It was probably more an honorific kind of thing than a profession that he'd lived. He was an actor, right? His side job was painting people.
Then I know the Amelia Bassano one is a miniature, so it's almost like a locket piece of jewelry. So I'd be curious how many would be the small paintings treasured.
But, and again, she would have been at the court, so she would have a better chance of getting her portrait than Amelia Arden would have.
And in the comments, we just have a thank you from Pat. But thank you guys so much for joining us. Any last questions?
Again, you can always email me. That's why I provide that to you. So don't hesitate if you do.
Thanks, Bob. It was enjoyable.
Well, thanks for attending.
Thank you.